welcome to the program, everybody. Good to see all of you on. It is, of course, the End Times Update at 8. And appreciate all of you joining us here. We've got a wild ride tonight. We are going to be talking about so many things. It's gonna blow your mind. But welcome to the End Times Update. Glad to have all of you here tonight. Buckle in because you are in for a wild ride. Tonight, we are going to be birthing a nation, discovering where the Ark of the Covenant is, and watching a cow change the course of history. Yes, all of this right here, live on Facebook, if you can believe all of that. Let's dive right into it because we have so much going on. Thank you for joining us. We got Carrie from Hastings, Minnesota. Good to have you on, Carrie. Paul Bechtold, he says, good evening, Pastor. Good evening, Paul. Good to see you on. Katie Hansen, all the way from Minnesota. Doug Surrey and Daniel Noon. Betty's on, joining us as well. Andrew joining us as well. He says, hi, Pastor. Hey, Andrew, how are you doing? Good to have all of you on this evening. Like I said, buckle up. You're in for a wild ride. Make sure that you are commenting throughout the program. It really does help me stay on track. And if you have any feedback, I'm certainly glad to hear what any comments that you want to add to the program as well. This isn't just my program. Well, I guess this is kind of our program, isn't it? So comment and like wherever you're tuning in from, Facebook. If you're watching on the Facebook post, like that post and comment there. Don't forget to go over and like our Facebook page. That's End Times Update. And then we also have launched a YouTube channel, so you can go to our YouTube channel as well. Same thing, End Times Update. Just go check it out. And you can watch the videos that we've done in the past. So far, we've got a big 3 episodes up already. Actually, I think this is 3. We got 2 up posted. This will be number 3. And you can join us there. You can subscribe. You can get notifications that we just posted new episodes. All of that stuff. And of course, we're always trying to stay up to date on all the technology that's going on. It's hard for me to stay up to date with everything, but Facebook, YouTube, and my personal Facebook page. You can like the post there. You can comment there. You can go to the End Times Update page as well. You can comment and like the post there, and you can go over and view any of the past episodes that we have on the YouTube channel, so go check that out. The Third Temple, this is part number 2 that we are going to dive into tonight. We have so much to cover. And I just like, this is so fun to me to go through all of this because I see things happening. I see how it all is being put together for the return of Jesus Christ. And that's what this is all about. Again, this is not to scare anybody or cause anybody to be anxious or anything like that. When we see these things coming together, it really should get us excited that the return of the Lord is near, and it should motivate us to go out and make sure that we are faithfully preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. I just saw my wife join it. Tanya Brandon says, hi there. You're so cute. Anyway, so let's get into the program, and I had time to mess around with my wife well, that's kind of a bad way to say that, isn't it? I'm sorry, honey, if I'm embarrassing you. Okay, let's get into it before I get myself into trouble. The Third Temple, this is part number 2. We're going to be walking through all of this tonight, and I want to just remind us, because I don't think that the significance of the Temple Mount and the importance of the Temple Mount can be overstated. So I just want to breeze through as quick as we possibly can some of the highlights that we touched on in the last episode concerning the rebuilding of the temple, the Third Temple, the new temple in Jerusalem, and how close are we? Well, we're going to look at that tonight, and we're going to see that we are very, very close. What's the significance of the Temple Mount? Well, we know in 1948, Israel became a nation, and I don't want to understate that. Think about the historical significance of that. You have 1,900 years that a people were gone from their homeland. It was a foregone conclusion that Israel would never get back to their homeland, that they would never have that land back again. In fact, for, again, 1900 years they've been exiled from their homeland. The thought that Israel would ever be regathered was the furthest thing from anyone's mind before, I would say, like before 1890, and we'll talk about that for a reason. Even Bible teachers back in the 18 and 1700s, if you read Bible teachers and theologians, they were teaching that the spiritual regathering that's talked about in the Old Testament, it must be a spiritual regathering because there's no way Israel could ever get their land back again. There's no way they could ever come back to their homeland. It just seemed like such an impossibility. Even that gave rise to the replacement theology, and it fueled that movement throughout the 1800s, just because no one ever thought that Israel would be able to have their homeland back. But then, lo and behold, about 1890, 1891, you have the Blackstone Memorial with William Blackstone. He begins to start a movement called Zionism or Reconstructionism. And basically what his push was to say that we should give the Jewish people their land back, their homeland back, Israel back to them. Wow, this was like a crazy notion out of nowhere. And all of a sudden it starts to gain steam among leaders throughout the United States, of all places. You have the very wealthiest of the wealthy business owners, leaders, politicians, presidents. Even I think it was Benjamin Harrison was the first one to be presented with the first Blackstone Memorial. You have the Balfour Declaration. You have the second Blackstone Memorial. The Balfour Declaration was basically the UK, Britain, saying that yes, we do need to give the Jewish people their homeland back. So you have all of these movements going on from about, I would say, 1891 to 1920. And you have this big push in the U.S., a big push in the U.K., the British Empire, to give the Jewish people their homeland back. They have nowhere to go. They're a people without a land. Why don't we just give them this land? It was colonized, or it was territory of the British Empire at the time. And then finally, the straw that broke the camel's back, World War II, and the world saw the atrocities that were going on inside Nazi Germany during this time. And that just increased the sympathy for the Jewish people. And by the end of World War II, in 1948, Britain basically said, we're giving them their land back. We're going to give it to them, and it will be their land once again. We're turning it over to the Jewish people in 1948. I think God blessed Britain for doing that. We were the first nation, by the way, after that to recognize, I think it was 11 minutes after the documents were signed, President Truman, I believe it was, stepped in and recognized Israel as a nation. So we were the very first country to recognize Israel as a nation once again. And the world just dumbfounded that this could ever happen after 1900 years. But God has a way of putting all the pieces together in a pretty miraculous way. But even though Israel had their homeland, they still did not have Jerusalem. That's an important point that we have to recognize here. They still did not have the old city, East Jerusalem, which included the Temple Mount. Wasn't theirs. It wasn't part of their territory. Britain only gave them what they had control over, and they did not have control over East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So that's when we get into the 6-Day War. Again, we're just kind of, hitting the high points here in case you missed it in the last episode. In 1967, Israel launched an aggression basically against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. It was a preemptive aggression. Egypt and Syria were planning attacks on Israel. We know that now. So it was preemptive. However, most of the world, even to this day, looks at that as an aggression on Israel's part, which has caused a bunch of problems. But the 6-Day War, and through that, they fought a miraculous battle against Egypt to the south, Jordan to the west, to the east, and Syria to the north. God gave them a great victory in those battles. They were able to gain the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. This even includes East Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So this battle that they fought over the 6 days, the Six-Day War in 1967, they were able to regain control of the Temple Mount. The world largely looks at this as an incident as a result of Israeli aggression. And so ultimately what happened was Israel was sort of forced to give back the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, and eventually the Temple Mount they gave into Jordanian custodialship under the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty. They still had control of the Temple Mount, but it was in the custody, the care of Jordan. All of the security is done by Israel on the Temple Mount. I think I mentioned I've been there several times in the last episode. However, them giving this back or putting it into the custodialship of Jordan actually probably worked to preserve it more than anything. Think about it during this time. If they would have gone in and bulldozed the Dome of the Rock, that would have created all kinds of problems, and that real estate would probably not even exist right now. It would have been destroyed if the Israelis would have tried to build a temple on the Temple Mount back in 1967 after the Six-Day War. Just wasn't going to happen. So basically, Israel took the approach of and said, we're going to have hands off the Temple Mount. We're going to just give it over to the custodialship of the Jordanian government, and they can take care of it, but it will be in our control, and we'll provide all the security. And since then, they've just basically left it alone and let the Palestinians, run the Temple Mount. With the Dome of the Rock, and of course I mentioned Jews aren't allowed there. Partly on the Jews' part, they're afraid that they're going to walk into the Holy of Holies somewhere up there on the Temple Mount, and that's not good. And then partly on the Palestinians' part, the Palestinians don't want Jews up there at all, praying or doing anything. I mentioned last time on the program that when I've been there, I've actually had my Bibles confiscated before I went onto the Temple Mount because they don't want any kind of Christian or Jewish literature on the Temple Mount whatsoever. The whole area is like a tinderbox filled with gasoline that's ready to explode at any moment. Also think about this in the context of what President Trump did just a couple years ago. He declared officially by our government that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. That's the first time that had ever been done. And if you look at that in the context of the Six-Day War, 1967, the history of Israel, you really start to then see the significance of what President Trump did. Now, I don't make any bones about it. I didn't vote for President Trump. I support our president no matter who he is. However, I love that President Trump did this, and the significance of it at the time, I think, really was lost because people just kind of thought, oh, yay, he made the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, or he recognized the capital of Israel, Jerusalem, by our government. Yes, that's true, but look at it in the context of everything that's going on. He basically took a territory that is split into 4 sections. Politically, part of it is under the Jordanian custodialship. I mean, he sent a message to the enemies of Israel that the United States absolutely stands with, or President Trump and his government, his administration, absolutely stands with the Israeli government and the country of Israel. So the significance should not be lost in that, of what President Trump did a couple of years ago when he recognized that by our country. I want to just revisit something real quick, and that is we'll go over to the Temple Mount real quick, and I wanted to just look at the possible locations for the temple. We talked a little bit about this, but I really want to look at this a little bit more and look at a couple other possibilities, all really just to make one quick point that I don't want to have lost on anything. I think we talked about the northern conjecture, which is the northern theory. That is the theory that the temple was located, the original Solomon's temple and Herod's temple, the second temple, were located in on the northern part of the Temple Mount. So let's just look at that real quick and run through this. Right there where that arrow shows up, that is a dome, and the dome is called the Dome of Tablets, or it's also known as the Dome of Spirit. That is a theoretical location of where the temple was, and it's largely believed, there's other theories, but it's largely believed that that spot right there where that red arrow is where the Holy of Holies stood. And then also you have, I want to point out on here, is the Eastern Gate. Now the significance of this is that Josephus testified in his writings that you could stand at the gate of the temple and you could look through the Eastern Gate and you could see the Mount of Olives. And if you run an arrow from that, from the Dome of Tablets through the Eastern Gate, you can see that it points right to the Mount of Olives. So it lines up with exactly what Josephus said in his writings. There's no other place on the Temple Mount that you could do that you could stand in one spot, look through the East Gate, and see the Mount of Olives. That is the only place. Remember, the temple and the tabernacle always facing east because God cast Adam and Eve out toward the east, so away from him because of sin, therefore trying to cleanse yourself of sin and be purified to come back to God, you have to go east to west, coming back into the Holy of Holies. So it's just a reverse of the Garden of Eden. That's how the temple's laid out. So the temple and the tabernacle always faced east. So I think that this is probably a pretty good theory that the temple actually stood somewhere right around where that yellow rectangle is on the screen. Now, of course, there are other theories, right? Because you get 5 Christians or 5 Jews in a room and you get 50 opinions. The other theory of this is called the Southern Conjecture. And there's certainly good evidence to say that maybe the temple was located south of the whole Temple Mount itself. This is the old city of David where that's located. They have found evidence of the temple there on that side. I think it could be explained when the Romans came in and destroyed the temple in 70 AD, but some people think that it was located in the south. And there's certainly good reason for that. And they believe that the Temple Mount, where the Dome on the Rock basically stood, was like the Praetorium, or where the Sanhedrin would have had their offices and their meeting rooms and all that stuff. The Fort Antonia would be somewhere around there as well. So there's good theories one way or the other. I happen to lean toward the northern theory. That is just because I think that the writings of Josephus are reliable, and I think this is the only place where you can line all of that up. And I'm sure that there is somebody out there who believes the southern theory, and they're going to have all the evidence to prove me wrong. It's just where I lean toward. The point of it is not where the Temple Mount was located. The point of it really is where it wasn't located. No matter what you say or how you look at it, there is no one who's studied in this that believes that it was located on the location of the Dome on the Rock, Dome of the Rock. Now, I know that you look at this picture and immediately your eye goes to the Dome on the Rock and you say, oh, that's got to be where the temple's located. And so historically and traditionally, that's where Christians and Jews have thought that it was located. There is no evidence to suggest whatsoever that the Dome of the Rock is the location of the temple. In fact, that is a Islamic shrine. The Muslims believe that is where Muhammad ascended up into heaven with the angel Gabriel. And so they think that the rock under the dome was that place where he left and went up to heaven. That has nothing to do with Christianity, nothing to do with Judaism, and certainly nothing to do with the Jewish temple. But that's how the Dome on the Rock got there. So there's no evidence whatsoever by anybody who's studied it or read it or know that is the location. So the point is that you can have a temple on the Temple Mount, and along with the Dome on the Rock. And of course, we look at the vision that John had in Revelation chapter number 11, and God specifically tells John when he's measuring that temple of the temple in the tribulation period of that vision that he's having, he says, leave out the Gentiles, leave out the outer court, for it is given to the Gentiles. And of course, no matter which way you put this temple, whether south or north, the rest of it's given to the Gentiles. It's given to the Muslims. It's given to Christians. They're the only ones who are allowed on the Temple Mount, Muslims and Christians. So, and God even says that it'll be trodden under the foot of the Gentiles. So the point of all of this is again, not if it was north or south or where it was located. The point is to say is that it certainly was not at the location of the Dome of the Rock. That is an Islamic shrine. So what we know is that by the time of the tribulation period, there has to be a working, operating temple. We looked at that in the last episode, episode number 1 of that. We know that there's sacrifices that are happening. We know that there are things going on, and we know that the temple is working and operating in the tribulation period, and probably well before that, because you have to get things into operation, and they have to be going for a while to get all the bugs worked out. So I think it's probably would have been going on long before we entered the tribulation period. So let's talk about that then. A working temple. How close are we to a working, operating temple? All right, so let's dive into this. How about this? How long does it take to build a new temple? If you put everything together, you look at all that was needed. Now remember, there's some specific ways in which the temple was supposed to be built, not being used, tools of iron not being used, or metal, has to be hand-hewn, all of these things. I mean, so it's not like today where we're just, we can throw up a building in 3 months, and that's not what we're talking about. This is a very specified way of constructing a building according to the Old Testament law. So it's going to take longer. You're not going to have the modern-day technology that you would be using just to put up an office building or a home or a church, for that matter. So we know that the Bible says in John 2:20 that the second temple took 46 years, that it was under construction. Remember the Pharisees, they're talking to Christ, they say, this temple was under construction for 46 years. How do you say you're going to have it torn down and rebuilt in 3 days? Of course, Christ was talking about his body. And we also know from history that Herod's renovations took 3 years. Now, we don't know if that's included in what the Pharisees said to Christ. So if it was 49 years or 46 years included the 3, or if the 3 need to be added on, so it's 49 years. Either way you look at it, it's 40-something, close to 50 years that it was under construction in order to be built. So that's Old Testament, right? Took that long. Now, rabbis and leaders have already gotten together, and they've already figured this out. In 1990 and 1996, they held a meeting, 2 big meetings in Israel, and they met to determine how long it would take to build the temple according to the Old Testament. And what they determined was that they could do it according to the Old Testament, keep everything kosher, and they could do it in what they figured to be anywhere between 3 and 4 years. So it would take 3 to 4 years to build the temple, the new temple, in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. And they have already drawn the blueprints for the temple. And you can see that up on the screen. Now, these aren't the full-on blueprints. Of course, those are protected, and those are, but these are the drawings that they've released. But they do have the blueprints for the temple already drawn out. They know how they're going to construct it. They know how they're going to build it. They know how it's going to be built, how it should be built. Everything's already laid out. The blueprints are already there. I've been to the Temple Institute in Jerusalem. I have seen the blueprints, not the actual blueprints, but copies of the blueprints, and so they're already complete. I think they completed them back in 2015, something like that. Back when I was on the Word of Truth radio program, they were already in the works, already working on drawing out the blueprints. Not only do you need again, we're talking about a working temple. So not only do you need the temple proper itself, but you also need the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin, if you're not familiar with it, this is a group of religious leaders and rabbis and rabbinical leaders, from all around Israel, and they basically determine how things are going to be done in the temple. They determine what's kosher, what's according to law, what's unlawful, what needs to be cleansed, what doesn't need to be cleansed. All of that is determined by a group of leaders called the Sanhedrin. They also need offices, and they need a big conference center and room to meet in and all of these things so they can meet and vote. And, well, the blueprints are right there up on the screen. Now, these actually are the drawings of the Temple Institute Sanhedrin. I think these were completed back in 2011. Yeah, there's a date on there, 2011. But you can see they have the rooms that they would meet in, the big conference tables, and just the forum room that they would go to vote on things and make their decisions and however they're going to govern the Temple Mount. So the blueprints for the Sanhedrin and the blueprints for the temple already complete. They're already done. Now, what about the furnishings? Because, of course, there's furnishings that need to go along with the temple. There's the table of showbread. There's the washing basins. There's the lavers. There's the scoops. The name is the ladles. There we go. That's what I need. The ladles. So the furnishings are already complete as well. You can see the pictures of them. These are pictures that I think some of these I took from the Temple Institute when I was there last. But the lavers, the bowls, the pots, the altars, the table of showbread you can see there in the upper left-hand corner. The garments, you can see that at the very top. They have the priest garments and the altar already done, already complete. The breastplate is already done. And it's all on display at the museum at the Temple Institute. You can go there, you can walk around, you can look at this stuff. Of course, they have it behind plated, secured glass, all of that kind of stuff. But the instruments are there. I mean, even look in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you can see the trumpets, you can see the harps, you can see other instruments as well. All of this for worshiping God in the temple and the worship that takes place. All of these things, they're already there and complete. And of course, the biggest one is the menorah. This menorah, it looks smaller in this picture. And this picture I pulled off of the internet, but it's interesting. This was the exact location it was when I was there last. It is probably about, I would say, like 3 blocks away from the Temple Institute. It's sitting outside. You can kind of see that it's behind plated glass. Of course, everything's protected because this because of what they're doing and the nature of what they're doing, there's a lot of enemies, a lot of people trying to stop the work that they do. But that menorah stands behind, I think it's like 2-inch plated glass, bulletproof, bomb-proof, all of that kind of stuff. There's security guards all around it. This is out in the public. This is not in the museum. They kind of float the menorah around Jerusalem at different places. I've seen it at different times. I've seen it at different places. But it probably stands, if I can remember right, maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. So this is very large. This is not something you're just gonna, like a candlestick you're gonna set on the table. This is taller, taller than any person by a good foot or two, and probably weighs a ton. I have no idea what it weighs. But you have that. That's complete. And if you notice, they have everything. Except for, as we talked about in episode number 1, the Ark of the Covenant. But I don't want you to get hung up on the Ark of the Covenant, because here's probably, I don't even know if they really need the Ark of the Covenant. Now, that may sound completely blasphemous, but I know this, that there's good question as to whether the Ark of the Covenant was actually in the Second Temple or not. I know Pompey went in there. He was the Roman general. He went in there. Remember, he's the one who desecrated the temple in the first place. He went in there and he said, he went into the Holy of Holies when he desecrated. He came out and he said, I don't know what the big deal is. It's just an empty room. So the Ark of the Covenant was not in there when Pompey desecrated the temple and went into the Holy of Holies. So it wasn't in the second temple, at least not when Pompey entered into there. We know that it was in the first temple, Solomon's temple. We don't really have any evidence that was in there in the second temple or even Herod's temple for that matter. The Jews will say otherwise in Israel. They will say, no, before the Romans sacked it in 70 AD, we had an escape hatch and we lowered it down in the Temple Mount. They talk about it as if it is a fact. In fact, they brought me to a place under the Temple Mount, and they said to me, Pastor Brad, this on the other side of this is where we believe the Ark of the Covenant is. They talk about it not as though it's a question. They're not like, well, we think it's over there. It's back there. We know it's there. So they're confident about it. I have no evidence to point to that whatsoever. But again, I'm not even sure that it's really needed that the Ark of the Covenant be in the Holy of Holies for that matter. It could be that it would just revert to what was going on in the Second Temple period when there was no Ark in there, or if there was no Ark in there. Certainly the Shekinah glory of God is not there. The smoke that filled the temple. So we know that that's not there. Anyway, that's all up for debate. I just don't want you to get hung up on, we got to find the Ark. But it's not absolutely necessary that we need to find the Ark before construction starts on the temple or before the workings of the temple even go on. I mean, there were sacrifices that were happening in the Second Temple period, and evidence points to the fact that the Ark of the Covenant probably wasn't in the Holy of Holies. Also, along with this is the oil. This is interesting. In 2014, the Temple Institute started producing olive oil that is fit for temple use. Get this, for the first time in 2,000 years. Now, this oil is a little different. It's not like you can just, go to the store and buy some olive oil and there it is and use it in the temple. First of all, it had to be grown organically because, remember, everything has to be kosher. And then also there was some specifications about it not being pressed in a press that has any kind of metal on it or in it or touching it in any way. So it had to be a completely natural press. And there were a host of other requirements, stringent Levitical requirements that this olive oil had to pass. Well, in 2014, the Temple Institute started producing olive oil that is fit for temple use. So now, every year since 2014, the Sanhedrin has been making and preparing batches of olive oil that can be used in the temple. And the picture there is a vessel that holds that olive oil. It is a ceramic vessel that is particularly made to be kosher and follow the Levitical laws to store the temple oil in. In the lower pictures, you see some yeshiva students who are gathering the olives by hand, putting them in pails or buckets or boxes, whatever those are, and they're going to bring them over to the presses and begin the process of pressing the pure and fine oil out for use of the temple. Now, also, the Sanhedrin makes and prepares these batches, but it also uses the oil. Every year at Hanukkah in Jerusalem, there is a mock-up of the menorah setup, and they use the temple oil to light this mock menorah in Jerusalem. So they're using it and burning the oil. They're making sure everything works properly. So this is like a dress rehearsal for the real deal that I believe, and I think if you're watching this program, you'll believe is soon to come. So every year in Jerusalem around Hanukkah time, around just before Christmas to us, they have a big ceremony, and the Sanhedrin and the rabbis get together and they light this menorah in Jerusalem. So you see, they have the blueprints for the building of the temple. They have the blueprints for the building of the Sanhedrin. They have all of the furniture all ready to go, built and ready to go, gold-plated and everything, just ready to be moved out of the Temple Institute Museum and put into the temple on the Temple Mount. They have the oil that they'll use burning in the menorah. The only thing they don't have, I don't think, is the showbread. I probably wouldn't make that now. It might get moldy by by the time. Anyway, so everything's falling into place. However, all of that aside, the most significant and most difficult to recreate item in the temple we haven't even talked about yet, and that is the item of the red heifer. And this is really what I want to get into, because this is very interesting, and I love talking about this because it is such a miracle of God. The reason why I said it's the most significant is because everything that happens in the temple is based off of the red heifer, and the most difficult to recreate because it's not like you can just go in and make a red heifer. Not according to Levitical law, to make it kosher and pass the Sanhedrin's inspection and the rabbi's inspection. Even with, us messing with DNA and DNA engineering, we probably couldn't get it as good as it needs to be according to the rabbis. So I'm saying that this is the most significant and the most difficult because everything that happens in the temple is based on the red heifer. Now, why is it the most important? Well, it's the most important because it's how all of the priests, the furnishings and the instruments, and the people of Israel are purified. Go to Numbers chapter number 19, and I want you to look at this real quick. Numbers 19, and I'm going to read verses 1 and 2, and then I'm going to explain what the rest of the chapter has to say because we don't have time to read all of it here. But this is where we're introduced to the idea of the red heifer in the worship of God in the tabernacle. This then follows suit into the Solomon's temple and then follows into the second temple and even Herod's temple all the way to 70 AD. This is going on in Israel. But this is what the Lord said is in Numbers chapter number 19, verses 1 and 2. It says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord hath commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they bring thee a red heifer." Look at what it says. "Without spot, wherein is no blemish." Now I tell you what, these rabbis take this very literally. "Whereupon which never came a yoke." So this animal had never been yoked before, not working in the field with a yoke on its back. This animal was supposed to be sanctified and special. And it goes on and gives instruction about what's supposed to be done with this red heifer. The instructions are that this heifer is to be slaughtered in front of the high priest, in front of the face of the high priest. When the animal is slaughtered, it is to be burned. Now, it's to be burned in a very specific and peculiar manner. And I love this part because let me try to find this here. And it says, let me see. Here it is. Here. It's verse number 6. It says, "And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and cast it into the midst of the burning of the heifer." So they're supposed to bring the heifer to some kind of altar that is burning. They're supposed to put the body of the red heifer onto the altar, burn the red heifer. While the red heifer is burning, they're supposed to take cedar wood, hyssop, and they're supposed to take scarlet and cast it all into the fire. Now, what I find very interesting is that all of these elements appear at the cross of Calvary. You have cedar wood. I believe that the cross of Christ was made out of cedar. Historically, what we know from the Romans is that they would have built the cross out of cedar wood. Either way, the cross was made out of wood. We know that. And the Bible says here, cedar wood. So they're supposed to bring cedar wood, cast it into the fire. They're also supposed to bring hyssop. What else appears at the cross? Hyssop. They give Christ hyssop they try to give him hyssop in order to dull his senses to ease the pain. He refuses the hyssop, remember, so that he could utter the prophecies from the cross. And then the last thing that shows up at the cross is his garment of scarlet. Remember, the Bible says that they put that garment of scarlet on him and mocked him. All of those things show up at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. You have the cedar, you have the hyssop, and you have the scarlet. Yes, and Matthew chapter number 27, by the way, says it's scarlet. I know some of you are thinking, well, it says purple. It says purple in the parallel passages in the synoptic gospels, the other gospels. not the Synoptic Gospels, the other Gospels, but in Matthew's Gospel, the one written to the Jews, by the way, it says scarlet. You say, what is it? Well, that's a whole nother topic. It's both, let's put it that way. However, Matthew, written to the Jews, says scarlet because it's a nod, it's a point back to the red heifer. So what they're supposed to do, and the significance of all of this, is that they're supposed to take the ashes of the heifer and they're supposed to mingle it with the water for purification. And so anytime anything needs to be purified, it is supposed to be washed with that water. That's what it says in the rest of Numbers chapter number 19. It also says when somebody comes who needs to be purified, remember they have an issue of blood, they touch somebody with leprosy, or they touch a dead body, they are supposed to come and be washed in the water that is mingled with the ashes of the red heifer. The ashes of the red heifer is how everything is purified in the working of the temple. So the reason why I say that it's the most significant is that you cannot have any of these other things with the temple. None of the furniture matters. The temple itself doesn't even matter. The priests don't matter. The purification, nothing matters if you don't have a red heifer. Everything that the temple operates and does is based on having the ashes of the red heifer to purify everything. I think that Numbers chapter number 19 is a beautiful picture of Jesus Christ. I think that the cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet are all a nod to the cross of Calvary, saying that's the guy, that Messiah who's hanging on the cross is going to be the one who's going to purify everything. Take away all the sin of all the people. So I think it's a beautiful picture of the cross of Calvary. But in a logistical sense, nothing in the temple or the tabernacle matters if you don't have the red heifer to burn and get the ashes, mingle it with the water so that you can wash and purify everything in the temple. All of the people, when they become defiled, are cleansed by that water that is mixed with the ashes of the red heifer. So having the temple and all the furnishings do you absolutely no good if you don't have the red heifer. That's why I say this is the most significant part of it all. And the Jews knew this. And for 2,000 years, there was not a red heifer born in Israel until something strangely happened in 1989. 2 years after the Temple Institute was founded, by the way. The Temple Institute was founded in 1987. And a Christian farmer in Mississippi, of all places. Just think about don't tell me God doesn't have a sense of humor. There is a Christian farmer who is an ordained preacher, by the way. He's an evangelist. He is a farmer, and guess what he raises on his farm? He raises grade A red Angus cows. I'm not kidding you. It's a true story. The guy's name is Clyde Lott. You can see a picture of him. He's actually, this is a picture back, it must be shortly after 1987 or 1989. This is probably 1990, 1991. Chaim Richman, who is the rabbi, he runs the Temple Institute. I've met him because I've been to the Temple Institute, and he's been on the radio. He's been on the Word of Truth radio program before as well back in the day. This is the first meeting that he had with Clyde Lott, who grows red Angus cows in Mississippi. So here's kind of how the story goes. A Christian farmer, evangelist preacher by the name of Clyde Lott was a special kind of farmer. He raises red Angus cows. He had been recently reading Numbers chapter number 19, and he heard about the newly established Temple Institute in Jerusalem. So he writes them a letter and basically says, hey, do you guys need any red cows? like you just can't make these things up. God is so strange how he brings about all of this stuff. By the way, at the exact time that it's needed. God's timing is never wrong. It's always the perfect timing. So Chaim Richman gets the letter, and basically is like, unbeknownst, while all of this is going on, Chaim Richman, who 2 years before this established the Temple Institute, he's looking for red heifers and he can't find them anywhere because they haven't been in Israel for 2,000 years. So he's looking around and going everywhere, looking anywhere to try to find these, and he gets this letter in the mail from this southern farmer down in Mississippi. Hey, do you have any need of some red cows? So basically, Chaim Richman gets on a plane and he goes to see what Clyde Lott is, what he's all about and what he's got, and he finds that these are almost. Now, I'm using this carefully because remember, the rabbis take things very literally when it comes to the law. Almost pure, close enough, closer than Chaim Richman could ever find in Israel, by the way. He can't even find red cows at all. So what he does is he takes some embryos, frozen embryos, from Clyde Lott's farm and ships them over to Israel. Because of Israel's laws of transporting livestock and that, they weren't able to send a cow over. So they took some embryos, brought them over, and implanted them in some cows that they already had in Israel, just some regular Angus cows, not red ones. And they gave birth to these red heifers. Now, it's a lot harder than it sounds. It wasn't like, oh, they were born and there's the red heifers and everything's good. No. The rabbis have to go through and they have to search painstakingly every hair. Remember, the Bible says no spot and no blemish. And so they painstakingly went through every hair on the cow, and if they found a black one or a white one or a purple one or whatever, it was disqualified. It could not be the red heifer that would be offered at the temple. It was completely disqualified by the Temple Institute and the Sanhedrin. They thought they found one, I think, in 1996, and then they found a white hair on it. They thought they found one in 2000, and then again in 2004. What would happen is they would start out calves, and the calves would have everything right, all red. They'd be inspected, and then as they grew and matured, they would grow like a white hair or a black hair. I mean, they did everything. They looked at eyelashes, everything. This had to be an absolutely pure red heifer, without spot, without blemish. Remember, that's what it says in Numbers chapter 19 and verse number 2. So they would find them, and then they would mature, and they would grow gray hairs, white hairs, black hairs, and then they'd end up being disqualified. So this was a long, long process of them breeding. I mean, the Temple Institute started a whole Red Angus breeding program just to breed one pure red heifer at some point down the road. They were hoping that it would happen. Well, lo and behold, just 2 years ago, in 2018, the first absolutely pure red heifer was born in Israel in 2,000 years. It was certified by a board of rabbis and the Sanhedrin. And what's interesting to note about all of this is that from the tabernacle to Herod's temple, there were 9 red heifers that were used. So I think Moses was the first one. Yeah, Moses was the first one to sacrifice a red heifer, get the ashes and start the, following the law according to what we just read, and the ashes and the water and the purification. That went on through the first temple, Solomon's temple, went on through the second temple, Herod's temple, all the way to 70 AD. So from the time of Moses to 70 AD, there were 9 red heifers that were sacrificed. Remember, the Bible goes on and it explains that those ashes are to be kept in a very safe place. So they didn't need them all that often because they didn't need to mingle a lot of the ashes, just a very small measure of ashes into the water. So they could make them last a long time. So from start to finish, 9 red heifers were used in Israel for the temple purification and the tabernacle purification, if you want to add that in there as well. This is what's interesting. Remember when we talked about on episode number 1 concerning the Temple Mount, the third temple? Maimonides was a 12th century Jewish philosopher. And a lot of rabbis, particularly in Orthodox and traditional circles, they read Maimonides and they really adhere to what he says. They believe that he was some kind of prophet of God. And remember how I mentioned that Maimonides said that a sure sign of the Messiah is the man will build the third temple on the Temple Mount. When you see that third temple go up, whoever's responsible for that, that will be the Messiah. And he's writing to his Jewish audience, and he's saying, that's your guy, that's your Messiah. The Messiah will come, and one of the signs that he has come is that the third temple will be built. Well, he also says, in a prophetic way, that a lot of the traditional and Orthodox Jews gravitate toward, is that he said that the 10th red heifer would be performed in the presence of the Messiah. So that's why the Jews are so excited about this as well, is because they're looking at this saying, wow, we finally, after 2,000 years, the first red 2,000 years, the first red heifer is born in Israel. This is amazing. They've had 9 up until this time, 70 AD, when the Romans went in and sacked Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. That was the last time that the red heifer was needed. 9 of them, from Moses till then. Maimonides comes on the scene in the 12th century, and he says, look out, because your Messiah is going to come, and one of the signs that the Messiah is come is that he will build the temple, and the 10th, and he specifically says the 10th red heifer will be performed in the presence of the Messiah. So when all of these Jews are seeing this happen, they are looking for their coming Messiah. Now, we know that according to Revelation and according to Daniel, we know that the abomination of desolation will take place. A lot of people, Christian theologians, and those who study eschatology believe that the Antichrist will be able to fool the Jewish people, deceive even the very elect, right? And he will basically be able to convince them that he is the Messiah. Well, if you have a bunch of Orthodox and traditional Jewish people who are looking for that person who comes and builds the temple, and that person who comes and sacrifices the red heifer, or is at least in the presence of the sacrificing of the red heifer, that is going to be pretty convincing evidence that that guy is the Messiah. But we know from the book of Revelation and from Matthew chapter number 24 and from Daniel chapter 9 and chapter number 11, we know that the prophet Daniel and Christ himself and John, looking into the tribulation period, we know that they are going to be deceived. And we know from Daniel chapter 9 and Daniel chapter 11 that the Antichrist will sit down on his throne in the Holy of Holies and declare himself to be God. And the Jews will know at that moment that they have been betrayed, that this is not the Messiah, that they had been deceived. And from that time forward, the Antichrist will begin to persecute the Jews, and they will flee into what the Bible calls a place prepared by God. And we'll do one of the programs here coming up in the near future on the place prepared of God. What is that and where is that? I've been there before. But if we look at now they're breeding red heifers in Israel just as we speak. I mean, it's amazing to see this after 2,000 years. So after 2,000 years, they have the oil. After 2,000 years, they have the blueprints. After 2,000 years, they have all the furnishings. And after 2,000 years, they have the absolutely most important part of it all, that is the red heifer that they can do the sacrifices with. And again, remember, nothing else matters in the temple without the red heifer. Now that they have the red heifer, as of 2018, anything's a go. Anything's a go, because now all of the furniture can be purified. Now all of the people can be purified. All of the utensils can be purified. Listen, none of this could have come about at any other time in history. It would have been absolutely impossible. This is the only time in history when all of this could have all come about all together at the same time. God is at work. He's on the throne, and he's coming back very soon. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next Tuesday at 8 for the End Times Update. Don't forget to like the post, and if you like the program, comment below. And remember to subscribe to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel as well. We'll see you next Tuesday at 8 o'clock. Good night, and God bless.